Welcome everyone to Doc's Virtual Classroom. I'm Doc and I'm the teacher. Today's topic is a really tough one. We're going to have some discussion about what is called affirmative consent, and it's all about giving permission and knowing that you have permission to engage in sexual activity. While it's unlikely that I'm going to say anything that is funny in this lesson, some of you might feel like laughing, some of you might get uncomfortable. It's really important that you take this seriously, even if what I say makes you feel weird. It might even mean you're not ready to hear it, but listen anyways. I assure you this is really important. In my opinion, more important than most of the things that you'll learn while you're in school, because this is about your safety. So why is this so important? So let's talk about some facts and statistics that you need to know. The Centers for Disease Control does a survey with teenagers across the country called the YRBS. They collect data so that we understand high-risk behaviors that teenagers are dealing with. And I want to start with a basic fact that I think it's important you know. According to the CDC, approximately 40% of high school students have engaged in sexual intercourse. Unfortunately, 7% of high school students reported having been forced to have sex when they didn't want to. And while 7% might seem like a low number, that means 7 out of every 100 high school kids report having been forced to have sex or having sex without consent. This number is alarming, but it gets worse. It's estimated that 1 in 5 college-age females have been victims of sexual assault or report having had sex without consent. Think about this number for a second. 20% of women in college will be sexually assaulted, and most likely in the first or second semester of college. This information is so important for each of you to understand. You need to protect yourselves and others from this type of violence. In order to do that, you have to understand the laws around consent. What's our goal today? What do we want to learn today? So every good lesson has a learning target. What's the target of this lesson? What do I want you to be able to do? Hopefully after this short video and some of the activities that go along with it, you'll understand the meaning and components of affirmative consent and understand the importance of giving and receiving permission for all types of sexual activity. There are a few really important vocabulary words that you need to understand, and I'll use them throughout this entire lesson, and I want to make sure everybody has a clear understanding of what they mean. The first one is affirmative. This video is about affirmative consent. This lesson is about affirmative consent. The word affirmative is a statement of agreement or confirmation. I'm going to say it again. So when something is affirmative, it is a statement of agreement or confirmation. So you agree to something or confirm something. It is not passive. It is a direct action giving permission to another person. The next word is conscious. And you've probably heard this word before. And I wish we didn't have to talk about this, but we do. When one is conscious, they are awake, aware of, and responding to their surroundings. Nobody can give consent or permission for sex if they are not conscious or aware of their surroundings. If they are passed out, if they are asleep, they are not able to give consent. So a person who gives consent must be conscious. The third vocabulary word is consent. Consent means permission to do something. This entire lesson is around issues of consent. So consent is permission. When a person consents to sex, they give their partner permission. Consent must be affirmative, must include a statement of agreement. Person must be conscious, and their consent must involve a freely given agreement to engage in sexual activity. Now, I know that is a lot to take in, and this is a really serious topic, but it is so important that you understand every part of this if you're going to be safe. Unfortunately, Sometimes the people we think will keep us safe are the very people that make mistakes around consent. Let's talk more about the details of affirmative consent and how it impacts a teenager. There are some really important facts that you need to know in order to keep yourself safe. Number 1, in order for consent to be given to sexual activity, it must be affirmative and conscious and involve a freely given agreement to engage in sexual activity. So if consent requires that it is affirmative and conscious and involves a freely given agreement, what if you talked about having sex earlier in the day and now your partner is drunk or not thinking straight? Does consent still count? Absolutely not. Number 2, it is the responsibility of each individual involved in sexual activity to ensure that he or she has the consent of the other to engage in sexual activity. Nobody else can give consent for you. If your friend tells you that a girl you both know is into you, that is not consent. If your friend tells you she wants to have sex, that is not consent. Consent can only be given by the people engaged in sexual activity and absolutely must be direct and conscious. Number 3, an individual's manner of dress does not constitute consent. That we have to talk about this is sad, but it is absolutely necessary. Society often blames young girls based on their appearance and clothing choices. All over the country, we have established dress codes that monitor the clothing choices, and mostly for girls. It is not the responsibility of any student to dress in a way that limits distractions for boys, and that same concept applies to consent laws. Wearing short skirts, or what some might see as provocative clothing, does not give anyone permission to do anything, and should not even be a conversation in the discussion of sexual assault or a justification for a violent attack. A short skirt is not an invitation to be assaulted. Tight clothing is not a justification for being forced to have sex. Number 4, an individual's consent to past sexual activity does not give permission to consent for future sexual activity. Let's stop and talk about this for a second. Here's what this means. You may be in a relationship with someone that is a sexual relationship. Just because your partner has consented multiple times in the past does not give consent for the future. It doesn't matter. You cannot assume that someone has the right to say that you have consented to sex just because you've had sex in the past. If you are not able to give consent at that moment and in a direct way, you did not give consent. Number 5. When an individual consents to engage in sexual activity with one person, that does not mean they have consented to engage in sexual activity with another individual. If you consent to sex with one person and that person decides they want to include their friend in the encounter, you have not consented and it is not okay. Number 6. Consent can be withdrawn at any time during sexual activity. I'm going to say that one more time. Consent can be withdrawn at any time during sexual activity. So you've given consent to the person that you've been dating, but in the midst of it, you feel uncomfortable and you want to stop. Just because you consented originally doesn't mean it can't be taken away. Consent can be taken back at any time. Number 7. An individual cannot consent to sexual activity if they are unable to understand the nature of the activity or give knowing consent due to circumstances including, but certainly not limited to, the following. The individual is incapacitated due to the influence of drugs or alcohol. A teenager that is drunk or has been using drugs is not in control of their actions and cannot consent to sexual activity. I hope this information was helpful for you. It is so important that you know your rights, establish your own boundaries, and be confident in the decisions that you make. Affirmative consent is necessary for all of us to understand in order to protect ourselves and others.